When is violence justified? Depending on when this question is asked, a person's answer could lead to something as horrific as this. Let's zoom in and take an actual example of violence from within the story. When Eren saved Mikasa that day when they were kids, was his act of violence against those men justified? Sure, you could say that he was excessively vicious, and it's also somewhat disturbing that a child could do something like that. But I don't think many would try to argue that it was wrong. The problem is when things become much less black and white. When the topic is something like war, people are naturally going to have ideological differences. Let's look at a more nuanced example of violence. When Armin blew up the port city in Marley, was he justified in doing so? If your personal answer to the question is yes, it was justified, then there are two different lines of reasoning a person could have. What they have in common is that they both acknowledge the strategic strength of destroying the port, despite the massive loss of life. Where they differ, however, is whether or not you believe that it was justified in the sense that Marley deserved it. It makes sense, right? When Eren attacked those men that day and saved Mikasa, he was simply harming those that intended to harm them. It was clearly in self-defense, and most would agree that they got what was coming to them, and that they deserved it. When the scouts raided Liberio, they were striking back at Marley, the place that has caused an unfathomable amount of suffering towards their people within the walls. It's easy to see how it was deserved. The uncomfortable truth, though, is that, unlike the men from the cabin, Marley isn't a person. Marley didn't hit the island of Paradis and then get hit back. The reality is, the vast majority of people that got hit back were people like this, or like this. You could say that when it comes to destroying the port, that it was unavoidable, that Armin didn't really have much of a choice. In some ways, it could be seen as true. After Eren went ahead with the raid, Armin knew that this port would lead to an immediate threat towards their survival on the island. He acknowledges how unfortunate and despicable the act was regardless, and it's something that is shown to haunt him for the rest of the series. But why does any of this even matter? Whether or not you believe it was deserved, you'd still be agreeing that it was the right thing to do. In this example, yes, but if we fall into this "they deserved it" mindset, that ends up not always being the case. It always surprises me how often I come back to this scene, how often people in our real world remind me of it. Flock blows up a residential building during the raid, and John yells at him to keep civilian losses to a minimum. And with what is by far the most realistic and accurate portrayal of human nature during conflict, Flock attempts to justify his own actions. Everyone here is our enemy, and these are just our enemies' homes. He dwells on the years and years of suffering his people have endured, and views the damage done by this one single raid as not even close to payback. What's ironic about Flock, however, is you can repeat his exact lines of justification and use it to support the horrific mistreatment of Eldians within the story. Everything we witnessed since the very first episode, that iconic scene of Eren's mother being eaten alive, the level of hatred Eren had towards Titans, it's identical to how the outside world views Eldians. The world's history is nothing but stories of suffering under the rule of Titans, along with the countless lives and cultures all being wiped away. From the very beginning, we empathized with and understood Eren's hatred and suffering. But keep in mind, those exact sites from the very first episode. That's all the outside world knows of the past 2,000 years of history. Remember what Flock says, this isn't even close to payback. Another concept Attack on Titan shows us through Flock is the dangers of an extremely nationalistic mindset. After being subjugated for so long and enduring truly horrific things, naturally there were people who wanted to fight back. Having a sense of national pride as a result is completely normal, but the problem is when this pride is taken too far. This scene takes place after the rumbling has already begun, and Flock intends to publicly execute Yelena and Onyankopon. Onyankopon is someone who aided the island for years, despite coming from beyond the walls. His people were also subjugated by Marley, and wanted to fight back against them along with the people of Paradis. As a result of that aid, my homeland will be trampled, my family slaughtered. He points out that the people of Paradis should know better than anyone the outrage of indiscriminate murder. But that doesn't matter, because the Jaegerists feel that anything they do now is completely justified. It goes to show that people really aren't so different. Now that the Jaegerists are in control, they can do whatever they want. They can execute unarmed prisoners purely for being angry that their homeland is going to be wiped out. They can even execute the Azumabito mechanics if they refuse to continue working for the Jaegerists. I've spoken before how the civilians are the ones that suffer more than anyone else, and that the ones responsible, the people in power, hardly ever deal with any of the consequences of war. But what if the civilians support the people in power? As we saw during the declaration of war, many people from all around the world, including civilians, supported the complete eradication of Paradis Island. In fact, it's entirely plausible, if not extremely likely, some of the people Flock blew up may have also supported the idea. So how would it not be justified then? If the civilians are just as immoral as the ones in power, then how is it any different? Well, that's the problem. When it comes to topics like these, people tend to gravitate towards the idea that it's an issue of morality. This is never the case when it comes to an entire civilian population. Take Gabby, for example. When we were first introduced to her, she viewed the people of Paradis Island as devils that needed to be wiped out. She was personally training to make that goal a reality, to save everyone and be a good Eldian by defeating the bad ones on the island. Is she simply an immoral person for believing that? I don't think she is. Although the ideas she supports are horrific, we're also shown that she was indoctrinated since birth and taught an entirely different reality. Even Eren expressed this truth during his talk with Reiner. If she's been indoctrinated to believe that the people of Paradis truly are devils, and that they are a threat to the world's peace, then it's not really a lack of morality for thinking they should be wiped out. But after those beliefs are shattered, and she actually got to know the people of Paradis as people, we come to realize that Gabby is actually a good-natured person. This is why dehumanization and propaganda is so effective when it comes to war. If you dehumanize the other side and make sure your people believe a certain way, it means even the most immoral people within a society can support horrific actions. It's all by design. It's why the conversation between Willie Tiber and Theo Magath is so important. We see up close how they're figuring out a story to sell to the rest of the world. It's all for the purpose of getting people to believe their narrative and support their goals. Ironically, war itself is a great way to get your people to support more war. If your civilian population is afraid and believes another group is an existential threat to their survival, they're going to support more conflict going forward. Then when that conflict reaches their doorstep and they experience more suffering, it only further reinforces all the things they've been taught about those monsters on the other side. An uncomfortable truth is, if you were raised within Marley, you'd likely end up indoctrinated and ultimately believing the same things they do. But it's important to remember that the vast majority of people anywhere in the world just want to live their lives in peace. The average person isn't different in that regard. So how do you get your civilians to support your warmongering? You create an enemy, dehumanize them, and feed your population lies about how they're a threat to the world's peace. And to be clear, none of this is meant to excuse those beliefs. But I think it's important to be honest about the actual source of the issue. It's easier to just disregard the other side as evil monsters. By doing so, you can very easily justify any act of violence imaginable. But the problem always starts at the top. That's where you'll find the people that truly benefit from the situation and will do everything possible to ensure that it stays as the status quo. But at the same time, the story doesn't tell us that the civilians hold no responsibility whatsoever. We absolutely do. It's as Sasha's father says, to shoulder the burdens of the past. That's our responsibility, us adults.